The Democratic Republic of Congo is on the brink of catastrophe. Now, the devastating war has fueled a growing humanitarian crisis, displacing millions and leaving countless others in desperate need. Aid agencies are raising the alarm, warning that the situation is rapidly deteriorating. This is The Conversation. I'm Darshan Osman. Let's talk. Well, just as we have stated, the Democratic Republic of Congo is facing a dire situation as violence escalates between government forces and the Rwandan-backed M23 armed group. Now, the region has been volatile for decades, with numerous armed groups operating in the area, forcing hundreds of thousands to flee their homes. The humanitarian situation is worsening, with water and food running low and medical services overwhelmed. Now, the UN has reported human rights abuses, including summary executions, conflict-related sexual violence, and also forced conscription. Diplomatic efforts are underway to find a lasting solution to the conflict. Now, joining us to unpack this humanitarian crisis and more, we have Shelley Thakral. She is a spokesperson, UN World Food Program, reaching us. And we also have Anjan Sundaram. He is an author and also a journalist reaching us from India. Thank you so much for joining us, gentleman and lady.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure. Now, let's begin with you, Anjan. As a journalist, you've actually seen the war firsthand. Can you describe an encounter that truly captures the scale of suffering in DR Congo, so we can actually have a perspective of what really is going on in Congo?
Sure. Yes, I've actually reported on the M23 group that is causing this current crisis. I traveled into Virunga National Park, which is just north of the city of Goma, where they, had their headquarters when I was reporting. And this group has existed for the last, 15, 20, it's been active in various forms for the past 20 years. Sort of rising out of the conflicts, the war that was sparked by Rwanda's invasion of Congo, 96 and 98. And every time the M23 raises its head, you have catastrophic scenes. In the east of Congo, you have hundreds of thousands of people displaced. You have, war-induced hunger, disease, all kinds of suffering that the local population has to endure. And I guess the main cause of all of this is I've also lived in Rwanda and reported on Rwanda, and in Rwanda it was quite open among government circles that the Rwandan government wanted to take over eastern Congo and considered parts of eastern Congo to be rightfully Rwandan territory. And so this proxy battle has been waged for many, many years, and it's now reached quite some seriousness or a serious state. Like the M23 have taken over Goma, they're threatening to take over Bukavu and another city just south of Goma. And the fear really is they've spoken about traveling all the way to Kinshasa and taking over the country, which is what the Rwandan-backed AFDL and Rwandan-backed forces did in 96 and 98. So that threat is not, you can't just dismiss it.
Wow. Sounds like a lot going on. Shelley, you did hear what he had to say about, the crisis, but also there's also a growing concern, that humanitarian aid due to the crisis, while essential, creates dependency rather than resilience. Now, how does the UN strike a balance between, providing immediate relief and also ensuring that these displaced people don't remain perpetually reliant on international assistance?
I think we have to give some context first. I mean, it is a protracted crisis. It's been going on for many, many years, decades. And this has obviously had a massive impact on families who've been uprooted from their homes, not once, not twice, but multiple times. So every time you have to leave your home, you leave your land, you lose livelihoods, you just lose it chips away at your dignity, it chips away at, your human right to live peacefully. And what the World Food Programme has been doing in DRC for many years is just to basically help give people back some of those skills that they need, whether it's to run a small business, whether it's for women to have some of their own financial dependence. Now, when you have a conflict, of course, it's difficult because people have been living in these massive, densely populated camps close to Goma, not even 10, 15 kilometers away from the provincial capital of North Kivu, in very flimsy tents. And now what we're hearing is that a lot of these tents have actually been damaged in the course of the last 6-7 days since the heightened next phase of this emergency. It has been a phase conflict. It's been phases at different levels. We've seen different strategic towns fall. The World Food Programme, who I work for, and what we do is actually we try and mitigate against very dire humanitarian needs. But I think the problem that we're facing now is that because we've seen some of our warehouses just ravaged and looted, and stocks have, obviously been taken. And this is what happens in conflict. This isn't anything new. This is what, violence unfortunately does drive people to very extreme measures. And, what we're looking to do is take stock of what we need to do. Where have the people gone? A lot of people have left these densely populated camps. That's thousands. You talked about displaced people. It's probably in the figure of, millions of families that have been uprooted over time. And I know it's a very long answer. Yeah. You have to just understand that the DRC it's complex, it's difficult. And people have been living with this for years. And when they speak to me, they say, I've had enough, I'm traumatized by this. I've got children that don't know any different. And why is that fair?
Well, when we come back, we'll actually talk more about, some of the challenges that organizations such as yours actually face. But let's come back to Anjan. Anjan, you did hear what she said. She also talked about, some of the tents, for displaced people being damaged and, serious, dire humanitarian needs. Now, while you were reporting back then, Anjan, what were the obstacles or the biggest obstacles that you faced while trying to report from conflict zones in the DRC? Was it access? Was it security, government pressure, or something else?
Well, it wasn't government pressure. The government in most of the places that I was reporting on in the east is almost is very weak, and that's part of the problem in this conflict. The M23 rebels and the Rwandan forces are very organized, well equipped, well armed, and when they took over the city of Goma, they quite literally overran the city, and the government forces melted away. And so my experience was of reporting in a very chaotic region with not much government pressure, but also not much government influence and power to control or fix what's going on. The real challenge was the insecurity, because in this vacuum of power in eastern Congo, where war has raged for several decades, as Shelley was saying, in this vacuum of power, you have a number of armed groups, a number of militias that control various pieces of territory, and it has to be said that some of these militias, at least, began with somewhat noble intentions. When a population exists and is vulnerable and not being protected by the government, it's quite rational and reasonable for them to seek to defend themselves. Unfortunately, as these militias, homegrown militias, have gotten more powerful, sometimes with the support of Rwanda and Uganda, countries neighboring Congo. These militias have then become their own de facto rulers. They take over large swaths of their territories. They control mines. They are responsible not only for security, but often also for numerous human rights abuses. And so what you have is a sort of a patchwork of different armed groups running the east of the country. And even though the government has some control in major cities like Goma or Bukavu, outside of outside of those cities, government control quickly melts away. And it's really, you have certain small kind of UN peacekeeper bases that are holding the peace and in remote areas, very small pieces of territory, but in huge swaths in between, it's kind of a no man's land. And reporting from this kind of area and in these conditions, you're very vulnerable as a reporter. You're at the mercy of these armed groups. There is no, I was arrested, I was taken, detained by an armed group once, and I cited the Geneva Convention. They told me, well, the Geneva Convention doesn't apply here in our territory. And so, it's supposed to be a global treaty. And so, yes, you're quite literally at the mercy of these armed groups. And so that makes reporting very challenging, makes access to information very challenging. You have to verify all the information you get. And most seriously, your own personal security. My life is constantly in danger. So you have to be very careful and very humble about, moving around and trying to report on this conflict.
Well, absolutely, Anjan. Well, we're glad you actually came out unscathed. But then, Shelley, back to you. Now, earlier you did talk about, some of your warehouses being ravaged and stock taken, and also the only thing you needed to do was, what needed to be done. Now, there have actually been instances where humanitarian aid in conflict zones had been mismanaged, stolen, or even used as leverage by armed groups. Now, what mechanisms does the UN have in place to ensure that this particular aid, despite all these challenges, actually reaches the most vulnerable and doesn't end up fueling the conflict?
Absolutely, no, and we have very rigorous processes. I mean, people are assessed on the basis of their needs, and I could see from the pictures you were just showing, you will see that DRC is, and I don't think many people realize this, it's abundantly rich in terms of it's very fertile, it's very green. It is one of the world's largest, after the Amazon, rainforests. So food can grow here. You can plant saplings, but if you don't have safe land to live on, if you are worried about, just the insecurity, then that is also going to be a threat to food security. And I think one of the things we just need to remind the world, and often this is the case when you have you have forgotten crises that have gone on for years, such as the case of DRC, is that this country, with the agriculture potential, if the infrastructure was improved, if you could get clean water, if you could help with employment, if you could help the farmers, have better sort of financial inclusion, you could feed Africa. I mean, that's the simple bottom line is this country has massive opportunity and massive potential. What's happening in the eastern side of the country is not the story of the rest of the country. And I think people are very strong. They do fight back, and they do want to kind of uplift themselves, so to speak, and make sure that, they have a future for their children, that they have a future for their families. But we're here, along with our other sister agencies, whether it's UNICEF for children or UNHCR for refugees, but we're here because we know that people need immediate support. If you're terrified, if you're running away from conflict and you need food and clean water and protection, that's why we're here. But we're also here to help build skills, build that opportunity, give children school feeding, give women business skills so that they can run their own small businesses, help farmers think about adaptive measures because of climate change. So it is, there is a nexus, so to speak, between the peace and the conflict. And, we don't want people to live in conflict. We call for a cessation of all violence. We want people to live in peace. so that they can build their future, and that we can see children who perhaps now are malnourished, mothers who are expecting babies who are also poorly nourished themselves, so that we can see them also become stronger and do more for the villages and the communities that they live in.
Well, Shelley, speaking about, doing more, I could actually sense the passion while you were talking, right? Now, but are there negotiations, or even compromises that agencies like yours must make to operate in such environments?
We work under the humanitarian principles. We work impartially, under neutrality. We don't have any political bias. This is the United Nations, and what we are here to do is to make sure that people who need assistance, whether we have to overcome access issues, security issues, we are one of the biggest humanitarian agencies, globally and also in the DRC, and it's just, we have to get back to doing what we do. We have to get to people who need our help the most, and at the moment, when you have got land and air and the water that's cut off, the Lake Kivu, where it's been difficult for people to sort of, move around as freely as they normally would. Life is sort of eerily calm at the moment in Goma. Yes, there are people walking around, there's the cleaning up that's being done, the markets are slowly opening. But the point is that in this country, if you are perhaps a daily labourer and you've just relied on a daily wage and you haven't been able to work or get any income, food prices have gone up, fuel prices have gone up, clean water is an issue. So this all just adds to the increasing layer of just perpetual tragedy for a lot of these families, and that is not acceptable.
Okay. All right. Now, let's hear from Anjan. Now, Anjan, did you find that international coverage of this particular crisis accurately reflects what you witnessed on the ground?
Well, no. It's international news is hampered by a number of different problems. There are colonialities in the structure of international news. There's problems of prejudice, of racism, classism, all kinds of things. The war in Congo, by some estimates, has killed 6 million people, and yet it doesn't occupy the front pages of our newspapers. You'll find smaller wars, such as in Ukraine or Gaza, as terrible as they are, or Syria, far more easily occupying the front pages and the headlines than Congo does, and that's because there is implicit in international news a bias. Some lives are considered more valuable than other lives. Some wars are considered more important than other wars. And so a war like Congo, where 6 million people have died, and it's the deadliest war since World War II, in my opinion, should be occupying more of the global public consciousness. It should be at the top of our minds, and yet it isn't, and the media and media coverage is partly to blame for that. There's a sort of fatigue about the war in Congo. There's a sense that it's run on for so long and so many people have died that it somehow doesn't matter if a few more people die. And I think implicit sort of in the lack of coverage of the war in Congo are also certain geopolitical concerns. Congo is the source of many minerals that are necessary and valuable for global technology, such as coltan, found in our cell phones. And Congo has supplied.
Yes, Anjan. Now, speaking of these minerals, we've actually spoken to quite a number of Congolese analysts, who have actually said that there's so many external factors, external actors, and even corporations who are benefiting from this particular war. So, from your perspectives, do you agree that there are external actors, governments, or even corporations or foreign interests who are benefiting from or prolonging the conflict?
Oh, absolutely. I think the war and the conflict in Eastern Congo, especially, which is very mineral rich, has become part of the global economy. It's sad to say. I've been to mines in Eastern Congo, just north of Goma, mines for tin, which are used in circuit boards, electronic circuit boards. And on my way to those mines, I walked past the graves of children who had died from exhaustion, carrying 50-kilogram loads of raw tin ore on their backs from the mines. They would walk through the forest to reach a road or a kind of distribution point where they could sell that ore, that metal, for very low prices to some kind of dealer who would then export it out, mostly to Rwanda and then to global markets. And so, you have young people dying, you have people working and operating, living in horrific conditions, and yet this supply chain has become a part of the production of global technology, of our cell phones, of our electric cars, of our computers, of our electronics, and that's a travesty. So there is now the conflict is so entrenched in the global economy that it's almost difficult to understand or envision the conflict ending, because that would shift interests and shift supply chains, and different actors, people would lose, certain actors who are profiting from this war would lose their economic benefits. And if you look at WikiLeaks, when WikiLeaks happened, it was quite clearly stated in US diplomatic cables that US support for Rwanda was also due to the US's economic interests in the mines, in these mineral resources and deposits in Eastern Congo. It was a strategic priority for the United States to maintain access to those minerals.
All right. Now, Shelley, we know that displacement, often exposes women and children to trafficking and exploitation. Now, how are organizations, other organizations and yours also, what are they doing, to tackle human trafficking networks that prey on vulnerable Congolese refugees?
I mean, I can't speak to that. I work for the World Food Programme. I can't speak to sort of, that those kind of violations. But I would only assume that, organizations that are specialists in this area, are looking to, put the protection of people first and see which kind of, stakeholders they need to work with.
Okay. All right. So now let's talk about, countries like Uganda, Rwanda, and also Tanzania, who have actually taken thousands of these refugees. And we know that yet themselves are actually struggling economically. Now, do you think that these neighboring countries will be able to handle some of these refugees as well? The influx of them?
Is that question to me?
Is that to
yes,
Shelley?
It is. Yeah, it is to Shelley.
I mean, look, this is what, if you're talking about NGOs and United Nations, this is what they do. I mean, if people are leaving to neighboring countries, whether it's the World Food Programme or UNHCR, absolutely, they mobilize and they make sure people have the emergency assistance that they need. And I think, that will always be a sort of priority in any humanitarian situation.
All right. So let me come back to you now, Anjan. Anjan, still talking about the influx of, refugees into neighboring countries, do you think that some of these countries would actually reach their breaking point soon?
It's your question, I think, alludes to a broader dynamic. I mean, both Rwanda and Uganda have been accused credibly of, instigating and perpetuating the conflicts in Eastern Congo, and which is sometimes expanded to occupy the entire territory of Congo. And so it's a sort of double-edged question that you're asking, in a way, because M23 is backed by Rwanda, the M23 group that has caused this crisis and caused the influx of the people to flee their homes, including into Rwanda. This conflict has been sort of fomented. It's part of a calculation by Rwanda that by controlling these territories in Eastern Congo, it will overall benefit. Now, are there refugee pressures and pressure the influx of people into Rwanda? That is true. Rwanda is in continental Africa the most densely populated country, and so there's very little land, and so there's very little free land and available room for more refugees. But I don't see it necessarily. Rwanda is an extremely organized country. I don't see it necessarily as a problem because Rwanda is extremely organized, as I just said, and also because Rwanda has instigated this conflict by backing M23. So it has presumably prepared for these scenarios and is aware that it might receive refugees. However, the country probably has calculated that the economic gains and the political gains that it would make through this conflict serve its national interests.
All right. Well, let's before we go on a break, let's wrap up with Shelley. Shelley, let's have your final thoughts before we let you go.
No, look, I think what you're doing today is incredibly important, is shedding light on what we can't cover in 20 minutes or an hour. But I think it's really important that the international community, puts the pressure on for a cessation in violence, for peace, for people to be able to go about their lives and have some dignity and have the right to, their education, if it's children, food for families, shelter. And I think that's just decent. It's, we would expect it anywhere else in the Western world. So why on earth, can't these people just have some reprieve? Because often in these situations you can talk about the conflict and the politics, but it's the innocent people who've done nothing to deserve this. They've done nothing.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Shelley Thakral, spokesperson, UN World Food Programme. We appreciate you for your time.
Thank you.
Well, we will continue this conversation with Anjan just after the break. Do stay with us. We sincerely apologize for the long break. We were trying to reconnect with Anjan, and we are successful. Anjan, thank you so much for connecting with us. Just before, the break, you were talking about, the young population. But then, if you could, add up, with this, the DRC receives far less international attention, compared to crisis in like the Middle East, Ukraine, and the likes. And you did say so yourself earlier. So what do you think needs to change? What needs to be done for, crises like what's happening in the DRC and other African countries, to garner more international attention as well?
Well, actually, I think the answer is what you're doing, even now and today. I think in the current model of international news, for example, typically for Nigerians to hear about the war in Congo, that news would need to travel from Congo up to London or New York and then come back to Nigeria. And that means the news and that information passes through a Western newspaper, Western editors, a Western filter for what's important and what's not. And I think that's a tragedy. And I think what you're doing today is shining a light directly for Nigerians from a Nigerian news organization on your neighbor, your fellow African nation, the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I think more nations in the global south need to do this. Countries like Nigeria, India, South Africa, China, these are all countries with rising economies and with the wealth now to be able to cover the world. And I think the more we're going to see more of this, and the more that we do this, the more that we'll find that it's going to be natural for Nigerians such as yourself to value Congolese lives more than, say, British news media or an American news outlet. So I think we're at a point where we're seeing the rise of the global south, and it's also time for us in the global south, myself being from India, to stop complaining about the racism and the prejudice and the bias in Western news coverage. I think it's time for our nations to start to cover the world, and beginning with our neighbors, and give the rightful importance that lives in our neighboring countries deserve. And we're not going to see this from Western news media. I think we have to do it ourselves. That's the solution.
Well, so many other people share the same sentiment, that African nations should take the lead in resolving, the crisis on their continent rather than relying on Western intervention. So let's talk about, what precise role, some of these organizations like the African Union and also regional organizations play in addressing displacements in DR Congo. And, would you say that these organizations are doing enough, these regional organizations?
Well, it's a difficult question. I think, regional solutions are important. I think what's been difficult for Congo specifically has been that President Paul Kagame of Rwanda is seen in many African nations and around the world as a very charismatic figure. He's seen as a symbol of Africa rising. He's seen as, in some circles, business circles or aid circles, as managing Rwanda well, as delivering on aid programs. And that's a problem because he's also a dictator. And he's put a number of critics in prison. He's concentrated power in himself. He's credibly been accused of, and sometimes has not shied away from admitting, that he's had a hand in the assassinations or imprisonments or the torture or fleeing of his political opponents. And so he's created a country, unfortunately, where power is concentrated and there's a risk of new violence. And unfortunately, leaders like him, in my opinion, hamper the efforts of regional organizations like the African Union to effectively resolve some of these crises. Rwanda, for being such a small nation, has remarkably large political power, and it's been using that, and in my opinion, has been a source of conflict, of instability in Congo since 1996, when it invaded Congo and then sparked the war that continues today.
Okay. Now let's have your final thoughts on this, especially on the humanitarian situation. Some have said that it is not just as a result of conflict, but also weak governance, corruption, and also economic instability.
Yes, I think all of those are important factors. There's a lack of leadership in the Congo. And some would point to this, some would point to this being systemic, this being maybe supported or encouraged by Western nations that have economic interests in the Congo. And this kind of Western intervention to destabilize Congo goes back all the way to Patrice Lumumba, Congo's independence hero, who in the 60s was captured and sent to his political enemies by Belgian paratroopers in collusion with the CIA and British, the British government. And this has all been documented. Patrice Lumumba was then assassinated, and since then, Congo has lacked a leader who truly represents the interests of the population, and that situation continues today. The former president Paul Kagame, the former president Joseph Kabila in Congo was also, I covered the elections in which he was elected as president in Congo, and Western nations had, politically supported him because he gave a lot of Western corporations and companies lucrative mining contracts in Congo. And so these kinds of deals that the West encourages to favor their corporations to the detriment of Congolese people, has created a country and left a country that is very unstable, where corruption is rampant, and it's a tragedy that Congolese people, after living through so much suffering, are unable to find themselves able to elect leaders who create institutions that ensure the stability and prosperity of this very large nation with a lot of potential, but that unfortunately continues to be mired in conflict and trouble.
Well said, Anjan. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to speak to us on this very, very important, topic.
Thank you for shedding light on this crisis. It's really appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so that was Anjan Sundaram. He's an author and journalist in India. Well, with that, we've come to the end of the conversation. Thank you so much for staying tuned. We'll be back again on Friday, same time, same station. I'm Darshan Usman. Take care.